And welcome to the show. The so-called anti-racist advocate Ibram X. Kendi offers his explanation on why blacks and Hispanics underperform on tests compared to whites and Asians. Hint, hint, it's the test, not the test taker. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, still under fire for his alleged racist rant. Comedian Jon Stewart was on the Colbert Show when the lab leak theory was considered to be a Donald Trump crackpot conspiracy theory. We'll revisit Stewart's exchange with Mr. Colbert. Now, remember when the so-called Disinformation Governance Board that was announced back in April of 2022? Here's what NPR wrote. 3 weeks, that's how long it took for the Department of Homeland Security to go from announcing a board intended to combat disinformation to suspending it. In those 3 weeks, both the Disinformation Governance Board and its leader, Nina Jankowicz, came under relentless and sometimes vicious attack from the right-wing media and Republican lawmakers. NPR continued. DSS initially shared a few details about the board's function and purview, leading to speculation and fears it would police online speech. As the board's public face, Jankowicz became a lightning rod, a well-regarded authority in online disinformation who has studied Russian information operations and advised governments under that of including former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. She was accused of being a Democrat hack. Conservatives seized on her tweets and passed statements as evidence of her partisan bias, end of quote. Now then, let's take a look at one of her past public statements. You tell me whether or not it suggests that this has been taken out of context.
And I am eligible for it because I'm verified, but there are a lot of people who shouldn't be verified who aren't, legit, in my opinion. I mean, they are real people, but they're not trustworthy. Anyway, so verified people can essentially start to edit Twitter the same sort of way that Wikipedia is, so they can add context to certain tweets. So just as an easy example, not from any political standpoint, if President Trump were still on Twitter and tweeted a claim about voter fraud, someone could add context from one of the 60 lawsuits that went through the court, or something that an election official in one of the states said, perhaps your own Secretary of State and his news conferences, something like that. Adding context so that people have a fuller picture rather than just an individual claim on a tweet.
Just as an easy example, not from a political standpoint, suppose Donald Trump said something, yada blah, etc. Now, the Associated Press said what you just saw and heard was taken out of context. Really? Now, about her tweets. Here's what she tweeted in October 2020. Back on the laptop from hell, apparently Biden notes 50 former national security officials and 5 former CIA heads that believe the laptop is a Russian influence operation. And Trump simply says, Russia, 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 end of quote. About Christopher Steele, who was instrumental in the fake Steele dossier, in August 2020, she tweeted, quote, listen to this last night. Chris Steele, yes, that Chris Steele provides some great historical context about the evolution of this info. Worth a listen, end of quote. Now, about these tweets, she insisted she checks her politics at the door. NPR said the attacks against her got personal. NPR said, and I'm quoting, Jankowicz has been barraged with abuse, harassment, and death threats. It all culminated in DHS's decision to put the board on pause for 75 days while the agency reviews its work addressing disinformation. The same day, Jankowicz quit, end of quote. And in August 2022, DHS Secretary Mayorkas disbanded the board altogether. Jankowicz later said in an interview, all the board wanted to do was coordinate among the DHS security components, like FEMA, or the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, or Customs and Border Patrol, and just make sure that Americans had trustworthy information about issues connected to Homeland Security. She said, we weren't going to do anything related to political speech. Also, Forbes writes about a Republican report criticizing the FTC for going after Elon Musk after Musk purchased Twitter. The FTC has asked for, among other things, all internal communications related to Musk, details about the company's structure following thousands of layoffs, and information about how Twitter decides who can access internal records after several journalists took part in the release of what was called the Twitter Files that showed Twitter effectively censored conservatives before Musk took over. The FTC also wants information about Twitter's rollout of its revamped Twitter Blue subscription and a description of how the company now authenticates accounts. The FTC has sent over a dozen letters to Twitter since Musk bought it, and now accuses Musk of a, quote, troubling pattern of ongoing delay, close quote, related to the request, even though, according to the Wall Street Journal, Twitter has given some responses to the FTC. My guest is on the House Weaponization Conference Committee, which plans to subpoena the aforementioned Nina Jankowicz, Republican Mike Johnson of Louisiana. Congressman, you have a lot on your plate.
We do, Larry. Thank you. It's so good to be with you. I'm coming to you from Majority Leader Steve Scalise's office here right off the House floor because we're in the middle of a vote series. But I wanted to spend a couple minutes with you and talk about these truly dystopian developments that you just covered here. I mean, the idea that there are people in the high levels of the Biden administration who believe that the government somehow has a right to determine what is acceptable speech, what is true speech, and somehow be the arbiter of that is something that we couldn't have imagined in previous generations, but here we are. It's truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, and the fact that Facebook goes along with it, the left goes along with it, these big media platforms go along with it, you'd think there'd be some sort of pushback, but they happily went along with it. I mean, talk about a collusion.
And that is actually exactly what was happening. We know that because of whistleblowers and information that's come out now with the Twitter files being released, we know that high-level officials in the FBI, we're talking about the U.S. Department of Justice, the federal government, the biggest law enforcement agency in our country, the FBI is meeting regularly during the last election cycle with the top executives at these social media platforms to determine what things need to be censored and silenced. And of course, it's no surprise to us that it was always the conservative voices, the conservative candidates, the conservative viewpoints. I mean, collusion is a big loaded word that has lots of connotations because they tried to use it against President Trump for impeachment purposes, but there really is no better definition of what was happening in that regard. And, you know, this is just the latest in a series of things that we are looking into. Our Select Committee on the Weaponization of the federal government is aptly named because that's what this is. You know, there's no better word to describe it. They weaponize some of the agencies that were designed, Larry, and to protect and to serve the American people have been used against them. And that is an inescapable fact, and we're going to lay out the evidence so everybody can see it.
Congressman, what is scary is that but for the laptop owner making a copy of the contents, we probably never would have known about this. And if you guys, meaning Republicans, didn't take over the House, the American people would not be knowing about this.
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, we set up this select committee. Some people have said it's styled after the church committee as a church-style committee, and that's, of course, named after a committee in the 70s that was formed to look into abuses in our intelligence agencies at that time. They came out with some reforms. They worked for almost 2 years. They had 120 different hearings to lay out the evidence. We're going to do a similar thing here. Look, we have credible evidence now. Whistleblowers from inside the FBI, for example, dozens of them, who have come forward to say, this is wrong. This is not constitutional. This is not right. This is not what the FBI is supposed to be doing. And in a number of agencies in the federal government, we have similar kinds of information that is coming in. And so our responsibility is to have hearings, to do this in a very methodical way, to present this evidence for the American people. Ultimately, the objective is to bring about reforms to ensure that this can never happen again. Larry, people don't trust the institutions of government anymore, but because they've seen all of these abuses. We have to stop it because you can't maintain a constitutional republic unless you have these solid foundations.